So yeah, I believe in terms of the groups that these players are placed in, Icefire is 1-0 in terms of the matches he's won, as well as Qusteka. No, I believe it's the opposite way. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think Qusteka is currently 0-1. Although I didn't get a chance to see his first race yet, but I'll definitely catch up on that soon.
He definitely went for some interesting strategies that actually ended up panning out pretty well from what I've heard. And we'll be seeing some of the strategies later on. Bear with us if we're just dealing with some tech issues on our end. But generally, under these circumstances, NieR Automata really sort of focuses on the different gameplay aspects that it uses. Let's just switch audio here. I'm not too certain on how.
Requesting permission to engage. Permission granted.
There we are. Sorry about all that.
7E down.
Yeah, so at the moment, both players are in this shoot 'em up section, which is how the game starts. Luckily, the game isn't like this for an hour and a half, so...
1D down. Assuming captain's duty.
One thing that's really sort of unique to this game is that it really sort of forces the player into situations that it's not... that really sort of takes the player out of their comfort zone and in sort of the camera angles that it uses. You'll see here that it's sort of like a top-down shoot-'em-up, and we'll be transitioning momentarily here into sort of like a twin-stick shoot-'em-up, really sort of highlighting the different gameplay aspects and how it's really sort of quick to change on a dime, and it can really take the player out of their comfort zone.
Yeah, this game is constantly switching perspectives. It's doing a lot of very interesting things, in my opinion, with the camera angles, locking you into certain camera angles at specific times.
2B to Operator 6-0. All allied units down. The operation is compromised. Awaiting further orders.
Operator to 2B. We need you to rendezvous with Unit 9S and begin gathering data on the local terrain.
Understood.
Unfortunately, I believe Icefire is mentioning in the chat here that he has got an input glitch. We'll see how that pans out. I didn't see it on his quick menu there when he was trying to heal up, but perhaps when he goes into his menu in the next section, we'll see, or we'll get a chance to see something known as input glitch, potentially. But at least for the remainder of this flight unit section, we're just trying to kill these enemies as quickly as possible.
So there's not going to be...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's not going to be too much difference between what both players are doing at the moment. We're kind of seeing Ice take just a slightly more optimal approach to killing these waves. But now both players are coming into the first real section of the game, and this is what the game will look like for the most part from here on out.
So most of these enemies in this first silo is really, again, just having to clear them out as quickly as possible. It's very... it's a normal trend for prologue like this. However, in the prologue, it is worth mentioning that it does showcase a good amount of what is offered in the entire game. I believe the demo for this game really sort of structured itself in the prologue alone.
You don't say.
Yeah, that is correct. And I'd just like to ask you something, Myth. We're seeing both of the racers here throwing out a certain attack. Could you just explain that to me, please?
Sure. Yeah. So the primary way that we damage in this game is mostly through what we call a damage glitch, and it's sort of a unique phenomenon when you have a short sword equipped into your heavy slot, sort of the reverse of how the game normally sets you up. And on that one weapon set, we're able to do a dash input and then a heavy attack, basically a couple frames after the dash input, and that one input will basically make all of the damage ticks on the spinning sword do about 4.5 to 5 times damage,
Do it.
which is pretty bonkers when it comes down to it. We're able to take advantage of a lot of damaging abilities in this game.
Which is really good, because by the end of the game, both runners will be severely underleveled, so being able to make up that damage loss with something like this is completely invaluable.
And definitely making use of those techniques effectively really shines in some of these runners' plays. Having good combat, especially in the later parts and earlier parts of this game as well, really makes the top runners shine.
And now we're going to see some movement, some vertical movement tech on Icefire's screen here as he attempts to and does get on top of this bridge and jump across. Now that's a very precise jump. The inputs have to be basically input perfectly. It's as far as I'm aware, the highest we need to get to do a skip in this entire game. And
nice, both runners doing it first try there. Unfortunately, what can happen there is that as you're crossing between the two vertical bridges there, it is actually possible to fall down. And unfortunately, you get warped all the way back before one of the silos, and that wastes a good amount of time. So fortunately, both runners made it across safely. You can see Icefire making good use of his lasers to clear out some of these enemies.
So yeah, those lasers are just some optimizations for the combat there, which allows us to hit multiple enemies at once.
I surveyed the entire factory.
It looks like Icefire is mentioning in the chat that he managed to get rid of this input glitch that we fear for most runners. Because of the game's really poor optimization, really anything can happen in these sort of situations. Both players are playing on PC, so the PC port in this game is not exactly the greatest creation mankind has ever made, but it is what it is.
I have a feeling Qusteka may go for it. Oh no, he didn't go for the angle swag.
I believe Kess was playing a little bit safe in some of his practice before the race, but time will tell.
I mean, it does make sense against a runner as prolific as Ice. He's a very, very good runner, so I know if I was playing him, I'd certainly be taking some of the more safer strategies.
True. Now, I believe it was more of a factor for Ice's first match in this tournament, but probably less so now. I feel like Icefire has put a lot more time into practicing these past couple weeks, and he was recently on sort of a hiatus from running from before this tournament, and it's interesting to see him come back as a runner who gets really good times, to be honest.
Yeah, I know he's certainly said before that his approach to when he does a run is to absolutely grind practice out beforehand so that when he runs he generally gets a good time. But both of the racers are now in a fight with Engels, and we are going to see our first instance of RNG that could really shift the balance here. So how this fight works is there are essentially two phases. There's this first phase that both competitors are in at the moment where he'll just throw out a load of attacks, and it's a time section, so it doesn't really matter. The punch that we can currently see on Qusteka's screen is it's the slowest attack that he can do. Now, very shortly on Icefire's screen, as we can see now, 9S shows up, and he chooses one attack at random from his list of attacks. On Ice's screen, we can see he's doing missiles, which is, you know, pretty good. As long as he's not throwing out that punch attack, it's very good. I'm aware punches can lose quite a significant portion of time in Prologue.
Icefire opting to also do a little bit of swag here. Unfortunately, he's opting for right pipe. How do you feel about that tech?
I'm a very large fan of the right pipe. I've heard we have some left pipers in our community, and it's been very upsetting to learn this. There is quite a large fracture between people who use the right pipe and the left pipe, but it's good to see Ice made the correct choice. And Qusteka getting really unlucky here and getting punches off of Engels. But what is your preference of
together anymore, Tech? I'm a strict advocate for left pipe.
I mean, I used to use left pipe, but that was when I was getting my 150 times. Ever since that time's come down, I've been using the right pipe, so it's never let me down.
Oof, and it looks like Kess is also going for right pipe. A tainted amount of swag in this. Icefire, quickly they're opting to go for some of the tech in this game known as a double lift, where for whatever reason when 2B performs a lift, she sort of dips into the surface that she's running into. And if you do a lift on a vertical or sort of slope that goes up, you can actually cause the game to think that you're still technically on the ground, even though you're midair. That enables you to basically perform another lift. There are a good number of ways to actually climb that staircase, but using a double lift with a couple heavy attacks and a jump usually works pretty effectively for most runners. So the section that Icefire is in right now, he's just waiting for the dialogue and some of Engels' attacks to line up so that way as soon as the dialogue ends, Engels does the necessary attack for the section to finish, basically right as they happen together. You can see on Qusteka's screen as well, trying to clear out these stubbies at the top of Engels is rather difficult because they can sometimes give you a little bit of a problem when they do their whirly arms attack that we despise. We hate that attack so much because we're having to dash everywhere every time we deal damage. So getting within range of those arms definitely is a pretty huge time loss if you can't effectively deal with those stubbies.
Yeah, that in particular is horrible. It's got such a huge hitbox and just puts you in a stun lock.
Icefire got a little bit of okay RNG, I'd say. Let's see how Kess gets.
Just an interesting thing to point out on Icefire's screen here. He's throwing those attacks out very fast, and that's done by actually just inputting a dodge after the attack there, which instantly refreshes it.
That looked like a 1450 prologue from Icefire, a very respectable prologue. Faster than most of my prologues, at least.
And Qusteka getting not the best RNG there. Looks like Engels threw out his missiles, which is quite slow, around the time when he should have been doing that punch there. And now we've got some menuing on Icefire's screen. One of my favourite sections of the game.
Surprisingly easy to mess up.
Yeah, which isn't too much of a problem in this category, but I know certainly in the longer categories that can definitely add up on the second playthrough.
It's always amusing, especially in longer playthroughs. You can always, at least in the way that the game is set up, you can watch back how you set those settings up. And it's always amusing if you always mess that up in the first half of the game to watch it back on the second half.
You need to be near an access point to save your data. You can
Icefire quickly dashing and using a heavy attack into that dialogue there in front of the transporters. Saves a little bit of time getting him closer to the door.
The surface? That means we'll be getting flight units, huh? Better head for the hangar. Usually we can't get near flight units. They're way too expensive for us grunts. Too bad they can't mass produce these things yet. The hangar's up ahead. Let's go.
So Icefire making his way now back towards the flight units, which we saw at the very start of the game. And we're going to be in for another shoot-'em-up section.
Hey, 2B. Why do you think they sent a combat model like you to a recon job? If all they want is intel, we scanner models are built for that kind of thing.
Orders are orders.
Alright, alright.
So there's not really too much to say about this section. Once again, just like very early on, it's just kill the waves as fast as possible. The faster you kill them, the faster the next wave spawns. So.
Exactly. Definitely being efficient on some of these waves is sort of crucial. You can definitely save a couple seconds. Sometimes runners can get a little overzealous in some of their melee attacks. There, like Icefire had missed a couple of those flyers when he was flying by, but nothing too big. What's more important is these fidget spinner enemies that we purely detest. Looks like the first one gave him a spinning attack that's not exactly the greatest RNG. He still has to take it down, but it will take a couple of extra seconds.
Yeah, those fidget spinners are particularly nasty. As we saw on Ice's stream, he actually threw out an attack that shoots missiles out in a big large circle, and normally they'd kill the spinners in one, but unfortunately it just started its spinning attack, so those missiles must have gone just underneath it.
Yeah, surprisingly underutilized by most casual players when it comes to the flight unit sections. It's a surprising amount of damage that the sort of missile program can dish out in that circle. And we'll see a little bit of use of that pod program a little bit later into the run. You'll notice some of the different movement that Icefire is doing. Beforehand in the prologue, he was just chaining dashes together. Now he's chaining dash punch together. It's marginally faster than just dashing, but we'll see in a little bit when Icefire upgrades his sword that he'll be doing another type of movement as well.
The interesting thing about the movement tech in this game, just to speed you up a little bit, is it's such a minimal increase to speed that even messing up one input can severely impact your time considering.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of a risk reward there to all of the movement tech.
Target location data obtained.
The general rule of thumb that I've always known is that if you mess up one of the, say, dash punches or dash swings that we'll see in a minute, it generally messes or nullifies the amount of time gain that you gained from like the past 5 dash swings. So, as Tech said, it is a little bit of a risk reward in terms of some of the timing.
This is 2B. Nothing to report.
Good to hear. Say, how's
Having
the
a
weather
little
on
bit of
Earth today?
connectivity issues here, but that might just be my
Does
end.
that question have anything to do with our operation?
Not really.
But you can see on Icefire's screen, he's just trying to get some of these items
No bearing on
in
That should be enough.
as fast and efficient as possible.
Wildlife has claimed most of the central area.
Unfortunately, the first 2 quests in this game are fetch quests, and yes, they are part of the main quest.
Wonder if there are
Yeah,
any
sort of just go collect the items, kill a few enemies, pick up their items and bring them back. But luckily,
Spreading these enemies a little thin here. I'm not too certain if he got the last item to drop. I think he just dashed right by it. So he has 2 of these items, but he's looking for the 3rd one. There it is.
yeah,
Sometimes
quite
you can get those enemies to sort of group up really close to each other, but it looked like they just sort of backdashed away from him.
Man, these chores are a real
Yeah,
pain
there was
in the
quite a
butt.
large spread on where those items were. Ideally, you'd want them all to land quite close to each other, but it's not always possible.
I don't think they're a pain.
It looked
But,
like Qusteka was having a little bit of issues on the city barricade. I know I've had some difficulty just trying to hop over that thing. Surprisingly, the collision box for it is sort of larger than you think in trying to hop over it.
And now we're just seeing
So right there
Icefire.
you saw that Icefire.
Yeah, just upgraded his sword using those quest items that he just received, which is very good for us because it increases damage by quite a large amount, and also it increases all of our movement as well.
To operator. Coordinates confirmed for location specified by resistance leader.
Qusteka just
Understood, 042.
finishing up these quests now, collecting the items,
Desert heat is going to make resupply efforts difficult to be.
while
Please make sure
we
you're
see on
ready before you
Icefire's
go.
screen the dash swinging movement, which is even faster than the dash punch. As he makes his way towards the desert, which is the next section of the game.
You'll also notice that Icefire is strictly positioning his camera off to one side there. That's because of a certain sort of mechanic in this game where there's an auto lock-on feature that 2B, when she sees an enemy, she automatically targets it without really needing to actually use lock-on. And that, especially since this is technically an attack that 2B does, if you actually do manage to get auto-locked onto an enemy, 2B will just sort of swerve towards that target. And in the case of speed, we're not really interested in that. Icefire quickly making some buys here at the desert camp, opting to pick up a couple buffs, some recoveries, and one of the sachets and an animal bait. Those will be important a little bit later, but he's going to perform a pod launch into the side of the transporter there. That gets him out of bounds and up onto this sort of sandy, invisible floor area. It's just a little bit of a better beeline from the main desert camp area. Qusteka making his way to the desert camp as well.
And Icefire just performing here another skip. Normally there we'd have to speak to a character named Jackass, which is a short dialogue. She blows up that barricade. However, Icefire just decides to kind of jump between the wall and the barricade. And then skirt along the outside and enter the desert this way. Sorry, go on.
Sand sure is
It's
slippery.
funny because 9S always mentions there that even though you've circumvented the barricade, 9S still has the dialogue where he says, like, explosives? Who would ever use those on a barricade? Even though the explosives were never used.
I also like the fact that as Ice was just inside the wall on that sandy floor, in the out of bounds, 9S also says, "You don't let anything get in your way,
Got
do
enemies
you?"
approaching.
Which I always find quite amusing, seeing as 2B's technically in a wall.
As it's known in this game, walls are merely suggestions. It's quite funny. I believe in most areas, most of these walls actually have a certain point that you can just clip through. Except for the desert area. The desert area is just stupid.
And we are seeing Ice perform some very cool tech there, where he plunges against the rocks as an enemy plunges in the background into the floor. So you have to time that very, very precisely, really. And it is a variable timing, depending on when the enemy drops. But that just allows us to move forward, probably saves only a few seconds, but it's very cool.
It's very silly too, because the rock wall, at least that we plunge into, really just sort of resists 2B's movement against it, so it just pushes her along, carrying her momentum.
Icefire coming up to a very large sequence break here. I'm not sure if you want to explain what we're going to see here, Myth?
Yeah, sure. So going into the desert housing skip, you can get into one of these apartment complexes on the right-hand side and just plunge into one of those open windows and get right out of bounds. He's going to skirt around this sort of non-solid platform to get down to the Atom Pit. This platform that he's on right now is solid, and he's able to navigate his way to a particular point in this out of bounds to grab a necessary trigger. He's then going to turn around and dash onto this platform, getting all the required triggers for this section, which is quite marvelous in how it all sort of works perfectly there.
Yeah, it was executed beautifully by Icefire. I know certainly from learning, it's not the easiest thing to learn, how to get that trigger and kind of maneuver yourself back. But yeah, on Icefire's screen now, we're just seeing just a bit of combat here, kind of kill everything as fast as possible as Qusteka comes up just on that skip that we saw Icefire do.
It looks like this also got a very decent stupid rock. And it also looks like he's going to try for Desert Housing Skip. I believe Desert Housing Skip saves around the realm of like 30 seconds, 35 seconds. Mostly because it skips having to go through all of these cutscenes that follows the machine through that complex area. But very briefly here you can see Icefire self-destruct. That's mostly just to kill as many enemies as possible in that section. Now he's transitioned into the Atom fight. He's not quite taunted there, but he is buffed up, so we'll see if he gets the trick there. Oof, Qusteka voiding out there, but he still managed to get the trigger over the Atom Pit. I'm surprised he walked into that side trigger there. It didn't look like Icefire got screwed by Atom, so fortunately Icefire was able to skip one of the sort of phases of Atom there.
Come on, through that hole.
Yeah, that was some very nice combat there in that Atom phase. Atom can be very frustrating to fight against because he has some specific attacks where he just becomes invincible for some amount of time. can be very infuriating, especially if he decides to do those attacks just before he's about to die.
It stopped. Looks like we're safe.
You can see on Qusteka's screen again, trying to get rid of that first enemy that spawns in is very crucial, because basically this whole fight with all these machines who have the loving title and who are renowned for this cannot continue is basically all just timed. It's all dialogue, no matter what.
And on Icefire's screen, we can see him doing a very interesting skip here. Now, normally we'd be pushing this box down and we'd run along. However, Ice is just going to give it a little push, and he's going to try and fit in this tiny gap here between the rock and the box. And like that, he can just clip out. And this allows us to do something very, very cool, because we time loadless. He can just run across here and actually save and load the game. And this will put us back at the entrance to the desert, which saves us just having to run through. So that's...
It looked like for a second there that Icefire was between a rock and a hard place, because he was sort of doing an interesting jump into a pod launch there. I've never really seen it done like that before. But it is also worth mentioning, I believe Qusteka has changed his weapon sets to include a short sword on both weapon sets, whereas Icefire has opted for an older strategy, yet more consistent strategy, to only do single damage glitches.
2B, 9S. We've lost contact with
That's very interesting, actually. We're going to see... I imagine from someone as skilled as Icefire, he definitely knows what he's doing, but that could certainly affect the combat times of some bosses. So this should be interesting to see.
Considering how Icefire's Atom fight went, even just on single damage glitches, that's still a relatively good fight.
Yeah, that was probably faster than most of my fights with the double damage glitch. Ooh, a swag headbutt down that sewer there from Ice.
Right.
Beautiful.
But we androids were modeled after our human creators, so why would machines try to look like
But the technique that we're alluding to here, for double damage glitch to work, you need to have both your first weapon set and your second weapon set to have a short sword equipped, so that way you can do the inputs for a damage glitch, a dash plus a heavy attack a couple frames after, and then you're able to switch your weapon sets and actually do the same input string again.
What are those?
That enables you to basically double your damage per second on any sort of target.
What the?
Wow.
However, it is a little bit risky in terms of the strategies that you have to use. Icefire, being an older runner, has opted to just strictly use single damage glitches, which is a very sort of interesting choice by him. And we'll see how that plays out on some of these bosses.
And Qusteka gets in the same skip, the save scum skip there, and we can see Icefire doing an out of bounds here in the amusement park, just essentially to skip quite a large section, a couple of unskippable cutscenes.
Oh, just narrowly almost going back in bounds there. That would have been pretty horrible. But he still saved it, which is good.
If they aren't hostile,
He's going to grab the trigger there in the corner and go up the staircase and call the roller coaster.
What's this?
Qusteka just getting out of the transporter after saving.
On rails at high speeds for the purposes of amusement. It was commonly referred to as a...
So yeah, Icefire just locked into a bit of an auto-scroller here. Not much to say really. Even killing these enemies incredibly fast doesn't particularly speed it up. If you are slow, I mean the roller coaster will go around twice, but I doubt we'll see that here.
So what do you think?
However, I do have a sneaking suspicion that when Qusteka gets to this section, we may see something slightly different on his screen.
I think so too. Although it is worth mentioning, I'm not too certain on how these runners are comparing in comparison to their PB paces.
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure either. I guess we'll have to go by the colour of the timers.
Most likely.
Alert. Multiple.
And Ice coming into another boss fight here with Simone or Beauvoir, whichever you prefer.
Beauvoir.
Beauvoir. But yeah, this is a very interesting fight, in my opinion. I know it's certainly a lot of runners' favourite boss of the entire game, which I think is helped by a phenomenal soundtrack.
Well, it looks like Icefire is opting for double damage glitch there. He's equipping his short sword on the other weapon set. Most runners would actually equip it for the Atom fight, but it looks like Icefire's opted to change it for Beauvoir.
Very nice.
He's
So
going
that will
to...
be...
Go ahead.
So I was going to say, so that'll be something I know when I learnt the run from some of the old runs, that was where I changed my weapon sets as well, which is just for that skip that we saw him do leading up to this. But yeah, on Qusteka's screen here, we can see that he's actually boarded the roller coaster lines. I don't know if you want to explain this. This is something very new and very...
Oh, I just got a chance to see him get through that roller coaster there. So, essentially on Qusteka's screen, he's trying to get, or he managed to get the roller coaster to start moving, and him be off of the actual roller coaster. So, this sort of dance that he's doing with some of the triggers there around the roller coaster station, he's just strictly trying to pick up a specific number of triggers in the correct order, so that way the roller coaster, when it comes time, will actually still hit its target on the tracks, as we had seen with Icefire's perspective, except that Qusteka is going to do something a little different. He's going to use this free time that he's made from dismounting the roller coaster to grab, from what it looks like, the spear all the way on the outside of the amusement park area.
Thanks.
Icefire doing a very quick Beauvoir fight.
So,
Yeah, that was some beautiful combat there from Icefire. And he actually self-destructed at the end of that fight, which people may wonder why, but you will see why quite shortly in around a minute or so. So Icefire just coming out of the Beauvoir fight as Qusteka just goes into it.
And you could see there quickly on Qusteka's screen, he had picked up the spear for a couple frames there, and because the roller coaster at that precise moment reached its destination, 2B just leaps up into the air and goes to where the roller coaster stopped, placing her back on the normal path. Although it looks like Beauvoir is giving Kuss a little bit of an issue here. It looks pretty risky there going up against that corner there. Sometimes Beauvoir can be really sort of mean in just stun locking you if you aren't careful, especially with a fast attack like the blades that we are hoping for out of her.
well, there are a few theories about that.
She sort of spins
No one
at
knows
you
for
very,
sure.
very quickly,
Hard to tell what an
and if you're
alien
not
is
careful,
thinking,
she
you know?
can easily take you down.
It's also probably worth noting that this is, as far as I'm aware, the only point in the A section of the game that you will actually see the hacking minigame.
In some respect, yeah.
I know it's certainly more prominent in a casual playthrough on the B section.
However, in A ending, we're not really interested in getting hacked at all. Unfortunately, all of these hacks that Qusteka might get hit there, it looks like he got hacked once, but out of all of those hacking sequences, it loses about 6 to 8 seconds or so, depending on how fast he hacks. very quickly here on Icefire's screen, he had saved at Pascal's village here, and he's also on 1 HP. That was as a result of the end of the Bovor fight, where he had self-destructed. And he's going to bait a moose and go over to the resistance camp.
I am definitely not the person to discuss
And
this with.
he's going to manage to drop off the item that he needs to drop off at the resistance camp, but he's going to do something a little different. He's also going to aggravate the moose that he's riding here, and essentially die to it. The reason being is because instead of having to walk all the way to the resistance camp and all the way back to Pascal's village here, surprisingly the quest progress still transfers when you die. So he's able to talk to an enemy here and go over to the moose.
Well, what do you think?
And he's going to essentially die to it
Now do you
and
believe
respawn all the way back at Pascal's village. It does look like the moose is getting him a little bit of a problem there.
technically accurate?
Just doesn't want to aggro to him at all.
Our village whenever you like.
That's an interesting RNG. I've never seen the moose just sort of turn away like that so many times.
And now we are seeing on Qusteka's screen something very interesting, which we will probably not be seeing on Ice's screen, which is a totally different kind of movement known as spear dashing. Now this is basically why Qusteka decided to skip the roller coaster and pick up the spear.
What's that noise?
It allows for some very, very fast movement. As far as I'm aware, it's the fastest movement option we have available to us. But yeah,
In new game, yes. It is quite fast. However, it isn't exactly the most appealing thing to watch or listen to, because it utilizes the act of spear dash, or the act of self-destructing and using a specific combo when you have a spear on the light slot and a short sword on the heavy slot. The inputs in particular that Qusteka is going to be aiming to use are a light attack, then a heavy attack, and then spamming, or tapping, rather, SD heavy, SD heavy, SD heavy, SD heavy. And that's going to basically animation advance to always be using that most displacing attack. And you can see that now sort of when Qusteka is moving to the city ruins here. However, it is actually worth mentioning that spear dashing in its own is definitely faster than the movement of an animal. However, Qusteka is still aiming to take an animal with him.
and on Icefire's screen here we can see him climbing up this very large ladder, reminiscent of Metal Gear Solid 3, and he's about to enter another boss fight. However, he's just going to decide he doesn't want to do that boss fight, just jump through a tiny hole in the wall there.
Nice.
So that was very nice, he gets that first time. That hole is actually quite tight. But this allows us to skip essentially this first boss, which the game doesn't really care about, and go straight to the second boss, which is the one we have to kill to advance the game. And luckily there's a very quick way of killing this boss as well. He has a very, very wonky hitbox. So what we will see on Icefire's screen is he just gets into a certain position, uses 2 pod programs there, and that just drops Engel straight away.
It is worth mentioning, however, on that second Engels, those hitboxes only really align when he's doing that laser attack. And if he's doing any other sort of attack, then the hitboxes won't line up the way that we want them to. On Qusteka's screen, he's just dying to the moose, transporting all the way back to Pascal's village.
These are the creatures that are in direct command of the machine life forms on this planet.
Much more
If we can
cooperative moves
destroy
there
them,
on
we can end
Qusteka's
this
screen.
long and arduous war once and for all. Our
It looked as
intel
if,
hard at
for a
work.
second there on Icefire's screen, the environment is really trolling him in that when he was climbing the route there, he was having a little bit of difficulty,
You're not
but he
much
pulled
for
it out.
plans, are you, 2B?
Yeah, those routes can certainly be more difficult than they look to climb on.
Look at all these dead machines. Seems like they've been here for a long time.
What is this place?
Icefire making his way into the next section known as Negotiations. This will be a fight between 2B and 9S and Alan and Steve.
Hey?
You.
2B! Look out! My name is Adam.
Yeah, and this is essentially another little time section here. So no matter what Ice does, really, this fight's always going to take about the same amount of time, unless he opens a menu or something like that. So it will be interesting to see if Ice utilizes this time in any interesting ways. Killing Eve here, you can kill him multiple times, but there's no point. If you kill him once, he'll give you the XP, and for any if you kill him again after that, he won't do. So yeah, he's getting a very quick kill there.
The stream can probably see it better than I can, but on Qusteka's screen you can really see sort of the time in the execution of this sort of movement here for spear dashing. It certainly clears through this terrain a lot faster than just using dash swings like Icefire had opted for. And on Icefire's screen, the camera unfortunately is not very cooperative with this out of bounds because the arena is this sort of ring and it's all locked into this 2D sort of arena. When you go outside the bounds of that arena there, over the wall, the camera really does not want to cooperate. But Icefire was able to do 2 sets of high jumps there to get over one of the walls and another to get onto the bridge, and the final one to get onto the final tunnel here, and he's able to clear out these enemies relatively quickly and basically get free XP, free items. Free items are always appreciated.
It's a very interesting one that I find, because most of the time we're using out of bounds and these kind of skips, these high jumps to get to places to speed up what we're doing, whereas that doesn't actually, well, it slightly speeds up our movement here through the tunnel, but it's very negligible. We're just doing that to essentially gain a little bit more XP as we're stuck in that time fight.
And it's just swag. Like, why would you ever stay in the arena?
That's a very good point. And now on Icefire's screen we can see that the transportation options have now opened up. Jack has been very kind there, opening up that option for us, and Ice is just going to travel back to the bunker here just to continue the game. As we see Qusteka making his way to negotiations.
Very quickly here, you're going to see an instance of what's called a partner dialogue skip on Icefire's screen there. Very quickly, he got up to the top of the elevator and was able to talk with 9S outside of a dialogue trigger there, right in front of the door. And he was able to initiate a conversation with 9S and walk into that dialogue trigger. That effectively cancels both the text dialogue on the player's screen and the active dialogue in the world to just not happen, or rather instantly happen. So Icefire is able to get to the transporter a little bit faster as a result of that. Icefire is also going to talk to Pascal there and talk to the shopkeeper. He's going to sell a couple of his older buffs and get some money. He's also going to opt for selling some of his HUD and system chips. And it looks like Icefire opted for strictly offensive buffs and some recoveries as well. That'll enable him to deal or at least be buffed and deal increased damage for a longer period of time than normal. Very clean mum skip on Icefire's part.
Do you think you'll be willing to call me Nines?
Yeah, that
And it
was,
looks like Qusteka was unable to get that high jump just right. Looked like he had enough height there, but just wasn't able to close it out.
We don't get to choose our assignments.
Let's see if he goes for it again. He is, and unfortunately doesn't make it a second time. Let's see if he makes it a third time. He might run out of time in the fight. Ooh, it looks like he's missing just a little bit of extra height there. I think he's missing the full sequence, which should be the counter-attack, and then a heavy attack after that to begin the rest of the high jump sequence. But it looks like he made it out perfectly fine. Not too much time remaining on that fight, though, so he's going to be pressed for time to try to clear out the rest of that.
And on Icefire's screen, we just saw another very quick dialogue cancel there with the partner, which is really good because that one actually saves an incredibly large amount of time. Otherwise, you're trapped in a conversation with 9S, which isn't very interesting, to be honest. Yeah, we can see Icefire...
Those crit plus 2s? Wait a minute.
I think they might have been. Yeah, so...
Either way.
Icefire just equipping some chips there, and this is essentially how you change up the combat. For a speedrun, we're really only interested in the crit chips critical up, because criticals in this game are very, very broken. In most games, they will deal, around double damage, maybe 1.5. In this, I believe it's a staggering 5 times damage.
You just be careful.
I think more than that, actually. It's pretty bonkers when it comes down to the actual numbers. But generally, critical chips are what we are looking for. They unlock the potential to deal a massive, massive amount of damage on top of all of the other things that we have going for our damage. In terms of buffs, in terms of taunt, in terms of damage glitch, we can really dish out a lot of damage.
So if they are crit plus 2s that we saw on Ice's screen, I have a feeling the combat is going to be very, very disgusting.
And it looks like Icefire is opting for an older strategy here known as Mario Kart skip. He's going to use the geometry of this hill here to basically slide across and up to that corner there. And then he's going to hold SD and manage to basically trick the game into thinking that he was initially in the castle, so that way the game replaces him when he falls into the water up on the drawbridge there. Icefire also going out of bounds here on that route, enabling him to basically traverse the castle area in a couple high jumps. Definitely one of my favorite skips. Personally, jumping through these windows is so fun because at the top there's a little bit of risk, but it's not that difficult to do, surprisingly. And given the complexity of the actual castle itself, it always boggled my mind when I was learning and just how easy it could be skipped.
It's very cool. Another one of these developer oversights which just pans out extremely well for us.
Conveniently, they left a couple windows for us to stand on.
A Yorha-type android.
Alert. This unit
And we can see Icefire now coming into another boss fight with an android called A2.
Let's go, 9S.
To be.
So we'll see how this goes. I imagine it's not going to pose any problems to Icefire, but I know most certainly for me early on, this fight is extremely difficult just due to the sheer number of attacks.
Very juicy crits. And it looks like A2 fight is finished for Icefire. There, 2 lucky crits there managed to get him enough damage to threshold her.
Let's go after her, 2B.
I did not get a chance to see what chips Qusteka got there, but it looks like he filled out his inventory pretty full. Overall, a very clean fight by Icefire. I believe that's on PB pace for me. 53-minute loadless A2 finish is very good.
Yeah, that was some extremely good combat there from Icefire. Those crits certainly really helping out. And we see...
Just demolishing A2 in that respect. I believe one thing we didn't talk about was taunt. So, one of the techniques that we're able to take advantage of, surprisingly, most people don't actually use this in A ending or B ending, but you can actually just spam an enemy, and it will do sort of a steam noise, sort of a hiss, and it'll turn either the enemy's outline or their head sort of like a red color, and you can tell that, or you can initiate that sort of damage increase, and it'll significantly increase the amount of damage that the player outputs, but as well as the damage that the enemy outputs. And you can sort of see this on all of the combat sequences in this game as well. Almost every sequence that we are fighting in requires you to taunt the enemy, just increasing damage for free.
Yeah,
we sort of skipped over a couple things there, but very quickly, Icefire talking to an enemy there and canceling some extra dialogue. Oof, that was an interesting plunge direction by Icefire, but he's essentially behind the resistance camp area. Oh, that was some lucky plunges there from Icefire. Quickly grabbing the trigger in the flooded city that loads the rest of the area's triggers, and he's able to plunge down to the back end of the flooded city, and once again tricking the game into thinking that he was in the flooded city when in fact he isn't, and the game replaces him back on solid ground in the flooded city, closer to these enemies that he needs to dispatch. It's overall a very interesting trick there, because it really showcases how closely knitted each of these areas are. Icefire leaving that fidget spinner to basically die on 1 HP there. Interesting mobbing.
Yeah, it was...
it looked like... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, overall, that was another decent bit of combat there from Ice. Playing very impressive here. And also, at the end of that combat, you saw him actually jump to a roof instead of heading straight across, and that actually skips a bit of dialogue and instantly brings in the flight units to initiate this next section.
And Qusteka's going for an interesting strategy here. He's going to do a very precise long jump, but oof, it looks like he got the input string a little bit wrong there. And it looks like he's going to try for it again. On Icefire's screen, he has entered a section known as Groon. We could probably just ignore that for the entirety of that section. If you want to get a cup of coffee or something, now's the time to do it. Because there's basically nothing interesting going to happen for the next like 12 minutes on Icefire's screen.
Yeah, just a very, very long shoot 'em up, with not really much to say, unfortunately.
So, interesting complications on Qusteka's screen there. The Moose was a little too close for comfort, and using that side technique on the far side of the route, he's actually able to just light attack through and clip out of bounds in a similar way to the front end strategy. And once again, Qusteka climbing these windows here, conveniently placed by the developer.
Yep, Qusteka just coming into the A2 fight here. So an interesting thing to note there, just a very minor optimization, we saw Qusteka gain some height and then pod launch at the top there. Normally what happens when we enter this fight is we enter a slow walk and have to slow walk to the crib with the Forest King. However, if we can land there, we can actually skip all of that animation, which just saves a little bit of time.
Picking up a large-scale enemy inbound. Looks to be 2.8 clicks southwest of us.
And Qusteka now getting some nice crits against A2 here.
Let's see if those keep up, and they do. Those are some very good crits on Qusteka's part, but it looks like he's not done damaging her yet. She wants to get away.
So yeah, it looks like both runners have got some pretty good chips here. Would you like to explain what we're seeing on Qusteka's screen here?
Sure. So normally, under normal circumstances, A2 hops out of the window there at the end of the fight, but the game encourages you to hop out the window as well, and but we're not really interested at that, because at the bottom of that jump there is essentially a 5-minute dialogue that we do not want any part of, and so I forget who exactly found it, but you could just do a simple high jump up the back area of that arena and escape the clutches of that invisible wall. You do, however, have to be careful though, because if your plunge is too short, you can actually have to be slow walk back into that same arena, losing a little bit of time, but fortunately both runners executing that trick very well.
Gotta find another way to damage it.
Yeah, incredibly nice there. And if anyone wasn't aware, if you do go the intended pattern through that window, you will have to sit through 2 very, very long dialogues. Almost as if to troll you. The second one starts just as you reach the teleporter. So it's very nice that we can skip that. And we're going to see Qusteka here gain access to the out of bounds behind the resistance camp, as we talked about Icefire doing, and he's probably going to do the same skip that we saw just to get down to the flooded city here.
Obtained from command.
You're gonna have to bear with me here. I'm having a little bit of connection issues.
That's no problem, mate. Yep, and unfortunately it looks like Qusteka missed the trigger, and it actually looks like he landed slightly out of bounds on solid ground. So as you can see there, he goes down and gets the trigger, leading him onto the intended path. That's actually the same trigger we would hit from underneath the building, which would spawn us back at the top and allow us to skip this entire little section here that we're seeing Qusteka go through. But it shouldn't be too much of a large time loss. So he's just going to make his way across these roofs here. Yeah, and he just hits that ground zone there, which is the same ground zone we hit from right at the very top. And at the same time, on Icefire's screen, we can see him actually fighting one of the Grunkors. Now, these certainly can cause quite a problem for some runners. Basically, there are 4 small cores along the outer edge. You can only attack 2 at a time, so the best thing to do is to take 2 of them out essentially on that first cycle. If you are fast enough, the game should choose the next cycle to be the next 2 that aren't destroyed. However, if you're not fast enough, then Grun can just decide to spin them around any which way he feels.
It's so annoying when that happens, because you're basically just at the mercy of RNG at that point, because not dealing with those cores fast enough really makes it difficult to get another chance to damage them, which is very annoying.
Can be very, very trolly. I know, certainly I've had some runs where, you know, you just have a bad set of grunt cores and that can be up to a minute of time loss just from the RNG.
So both runners are now in the sleeping accommodation part of this run. Not particularly much to really mention between these two runners here. A lot of this is just sort of either auto-scroller or, in the case of Qusteka's screen right now, just sort of dealing with these enemies as fast and efficiently as possible.
That's right. Lay down some fire in its stupid mouth.
Yeah, so I think it's probably worth noting that I believe there is a bounty out at the moment for any potential glitch hunters. If you can find a way to skip grunt, I'm honestly not sure what the bounty was up to at the moment, but
I haven't been keeping track of it.
No, I think it passed 1500 though at some point recently. 1500, a curry pizza handmade, and a caffeinated alcoholic beverage if you are above legal drinking age. So yeah, there is a, as you can tell probably from that amount, is this is a very, very despised section of the game. I know certainly for me it can be one of the real low points of the run, especially if I'm on a good run or something. Just coming into this section just sort of loses all energy and yeah.
9S should be reported to command as a deserter.
I believe Icefire was one of the advocates as well for this section because, at least recently, he really sort of despised this section in some of his runs, in how it really just isn't exactly the greatest thing to play, because unfortunately a lot of this is scripted. In both of these, in both of the runners' cases currently, both sections are just auto-scroller. A lot of these waves are scripted, and unfortunately, I believe I've mentioned this countless times before, but unfortunately it is a missed opportunity by Platinum, because, at least in some respects, there could have been a little bit of variation between these waves. And it would have been interesting to see as well, because it really sort of gives some diversity to this section. But unfortunately, it's all just sort of scripted.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
Icefire making Core 2 a little easier for himself, but unfortunately he missed one cycle. I'm not too certain if he's going to get this last core in time. Or just barely, and he's going to be able to damage that middle core a little bit slower than optimal, but still rather fast.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice there. Better than most certainly it could have been. I've always wondered where Grunt comes from, you know. I mean, I know he comes from the water, right? But if you look on Ice's screen, he is fully stood up now, and the water only appears up to about his knees. So I'm not sure how he managed to stay so hidden for so long.
Grun is a very tall boy.
Yeah, he's a very long boy, yeah.
It's funny because I believe between Marky, one of our resident glitch hunters, and sort of modders as well, he managed to figure out a way to model swap 2B and 9S to be Grun, and it is a very scary sight to see his entire model sort of like, I believe the screenshots that I had seen was in the desert, and he has a massive model But some of the silliness in this game really kind of comes down to that exactly, where just sort of trying, in the process of decompiling some of the information between some of our modders in the community, it's really sort of interesting to decompile that information and see what exactly lies underneath the surface.
And Icefire now has just come out of Grun, so we should actually have some interesting game things to talk about.
Yeah, definitely the latter half of this run is a little more interesting because it holds some of the more interesting clips and skips for the rest of the run. The boss fights are as well a little more interesting as well. Very quickly there, Icefire used the same sort of drown mechanic as we had seen before. He jumped out into basically the middle of the ocean there to trick the game into thinking he was farther into the flooded city than he actually was, and was able to drown warp his way through the flooded city. Now he's going to make his way through this tunnel here up to a specific point and attempt to clip out in a specific area known as Copied City Clip. This clip doesn't actually save too much time, but it is rather precise in its execution. And it looks like he's opting for the version 1 strategy, which is a bold move because it is a lot less precise, but still accomplishes the same thing. Instead of having to run all the way around the city ruins, through the tunnel, and to this elevator, he's just able to clip out and get directly to this elevator.
Yeah, I believe it's only around 4 or 5 seconds slower than the slightly faster version of that. And Icefire entering the Copied City here, so we're going to hear one of the best pieces of music in the entire game.
Sour, please!
What's with the corpses?
It is unlikely the Yorha units came this far on their own. Hypothesis: the enemy must have placed them here deliberately.
So, at the start of this combat here, on Icefire's screen, there's actually a long section here where Adam wants to talk to us. However, we don't want to listen to him because it's quite boring. He doesn't really have much to say.
It's a very nice clip out by Icefire there.
Very good. So, as we saw on Icefire's screen, he just sort of clips out using those boxes, which allows him to leave that fighting arena there and actually get back to the elevator where we entered the Copied City from. And what this will allow us to do is to actually skip the entire second half of this dialogue, which is the longer portion of it. And there we go. Perfectly done by Ice.
I know.
Worth noting that if you actually get stuck in that elevator and the doors close on you, that will soft lock the game. So that would have been the end of a run, but Icefire, being a master, knows exactly what to do to not allow that to happen.
It is rather scary, especially when practicing that skip in particular, in not dashing into the elevator, because unfortunately the elevator has some leniency when you first enter the doors, but if you go in too far into the elevator, it unfortunately just locks you inside. Very quickly here, Icefire is trying to threshold Adam down in that first phase, and now he unleashes his full critting potential. Holy crap, those crits. Very lucky on all of those crits. He has a lot of critting chips in his inventory, doing a lot of damage on that boss. Very nice. Overall.
Makes you wonder how fast that fight would have been if Adam had decided not to do one of the attacks where he goes invincible.
At least a couple seconds faster.
Yeah.
I forget if Icefire is actually on pace ahead of me at this point. I'm starting to sweat.
Yeah, Icefire could certainly make a very, very strong comeback to this game with this tournament. Would be very, very good to see.
Proposal. Procure
But very quickly there you saw Icefire do a couple different strategies between talking to one of the NPCs next to an enemy and walking through the dialogue trigger that exists just a couple feet away from an enemy. He was able to cancel that dialogue and talk to one of the vendors, I believe, but he was also able to interact with the transporter and pick up the mail essentially immediately. So now he's just making his way to the factory as fast as possible.
You don't say.
Indeed.
Qusteka almost on the home stretch for Groon, so he'll be leaving that section relatively soon.
Maybe we can meet up over there?
Sounds good.
target location data.
So this,
Marking
sorry about that. This next section that we see in Icefire enter is, in my opinion, extremely interesting. Not quite at first. We're going to see some slow walking. We're going to see a bit of waiting at first, but then we're going to see three very, very cool, very interesting skips happen essentially back to back. So we'll see if Ice goes for them, but I would honestly suspect that he does.
I believe Icefire has put some practice towards Deep Factory skip. It'll be interesting to see. Unfortunately, with some of his hiatus from this game, I'm not too certain on how much he has practiced Deep Factory skip. But I'm confident in his abilities nonetheless. Qusteka getting trolled a little bit there by core 3 on the final core for Groon. Very nice.
Very good. Qusteka coming out of Grun now, so both players very much in the final stretch of the game now.
Icefire opting to talk to Pascal there because generally Pascal's dialogue is not exactly the greatest thing to listen to, especially in this elevator. It's a bit of a funny strategy there.
And just a very small optimization there on Icefire's screen. We saw him double jump out of that elevator, which allows us to keep our momentum going forward and mash through a dialogue box very quickly. Normally the game would attempt to stop you and trap you in basically what is essentially just one dialogue box. So it's just a nice way of keeping up speed there.
Icefire is on very good pace here. We'll see how overall he finishes out the run, but it looks like he's opting to clip out of the Mooks room here.
That was beautiful.
Nice. That'll enable him to basically despawn these enemies in the Mooks room and progress the dialogue trigger to be as fast and generally as consistent as possible. The alternative to clipping out there would be to kill most of the enemies in that room, but unfortunately some of the mobbing is a little unreliable. Switching over to Qusteka, let's see if he salvages this copied city clip. He might not be able to make... Oh, that was very lucky. He got stuck on the out of bounds there for a split second there, but a very lucky save overall.
And on Ice's screen, we're seeing the second clip, or we're seeing him at least attempt the second clip here. I'm sure he'll get it shortly. There
Nice.
it is.
There we go.
This essentially is breaking out of the room that we were in, which allows us to use the elevator again to get back to the room that we just skipped all the combat in. Now you might be wondering why we'd want to do this. Essentially, this is one of the highest points in this section of Factory. And we're going to see Ice do some very cool skips here. He's going to use this pipe to gain access to this out of bounds, do a huge plunge, and actually get a trigger. Oh, that's very unfortunate there for Ice. He was essentially, as you get that trigger, you want to void out, and it would put you back at the top, allowing you to jump over this entire next section. However, even just getting the first part of that skip is very much worth it. Saves around 40 or 50 seconds, if I recall correctly.
Oh no! Very unlucky death by Icefire there. He had timed it just wrong there when he was unfortunately in that specific spot where two of those exploding mooks there fell directly on top of him. One didn't manage to kill him outright, but the other did. That's a very huge setback, however, in this. He is unfortunately not able to continue with the rest of the Deep Factory skip.
Oh no, look at Qusteka's screen. Oh no.
Oh no.
I think he went in the elevator too early.
Oh no.
And skipped the earlier dialogue and then tried to go in again, and I think this could be a soft lock.
No. Unfortunately, that might just be because although he might have time if he gets out of the elevator, closes the door, and then gets back in, he might still have enough time with the dialogue, but it doesn't look like he's going to opt to do that. Holy crap. It might just be game there for Cass. Unfortunately, that soft lock might just do it in for him.
Yeah,
my connection's not that great, so I can't really see how this is going to play out, but
Adam is
if he leaves that cave, then he's soft locked. Yeah. Oh no.
That's unfortunately it for Qusteka.
That's the second soft lock there in 2 days. Or at least within the past 24 hours. I believe Froob versus Panpipes. Froob also managed to hop into that same elevator and soft lock. That is very unfortunate for Qusteka.
Yeah, that's extremely upsetting to see. He did appear to be on, I believe, very good pace against his PB. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm fairly certain he was ahead. And we see on Ice's screen here, he's just picking up his body. From that last death, he ran through the section that he skipped over previously with the first part of that skip when he landed and did the very large plunge. And
it looks like Icefire opted to... Wow! You're kidding me! It looks like Icefire opted to choose the wrong option there when... Oh no. Okay. Wow! This is an incredible race for Icefire because for a split second there we got to see the amount of crits that Icefire got in some of his early game there. 3 crit plus 2s, one of them being a diamond, the other being very low in their capacity, is very, very, very lucky. I don't think I can emphasize that anymore. That is incredibly lucky.
Yeah, that's the best chips I've ever seen.
I think I've ever seen out of that, yeah. Oof. And it looks like Qusteka's still going on. He restarted his game, but unfortunately, I think that save is before Grun. That might be his Death Warp save. I don't know.
Death Warp save, yeah.
I think that's his Death Warp save. That sets him back basically 50 minutes. Maybe more.
Detected over enemy unit. Physical defense shield detected. Analysis. Both long and close range attacks are ineffective.
Yeah, that's the Death Warp save right there.
No, that is.
Energy source should be destroyed.
But on Icefire's screen, we can see that he's in a dialogue here, just kind of waiting this out. So what we like to do here, because Soshi will actually throw out attacks at us, is he's opting to kind of clip onto this bridge and just sort of float around on it. Which just saves us having to dodge some attacks while we wait for Soshi to become attackable. So he comes off now, he's taunted Soshi up, and that was perfect timing. He's buffed up, and we're going to see him go for a zero cycle here. Unfortunately he doesn't get it, but I imagine he's going to pick up a one cycle. Yep. It's a very, very clean combat here from Ice.
You could hear those crits just going bam, 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 one after the other there. Overall, very clean fight for Icefire in Soshi. I really enjoyed that boss fight casually because of the way that the music and the fight sort of mesh together in how it sort of crescendos as the boss is able to be damaged and sort of unleashes the full throttle of the experience on you, and then just being in the dark adds so much more to the fight on top of that.
Yeah, so I just saw a few questions in chat asking about if Qusteka could have suicided or loaded during that soft lock. Unfortunately, it's completely not possible.
He might have been able to salvage it if he had... I'm not too certain on how the logistics of it would work, because the loading in this game is certainly a little strange, but perhaps before he had got locked into Infinity Falling, he might have been able to salvage it. However, I actually do not know the details of it. I've always known that if you go into the elevator, then it's 9 times out of 10 rip run.
That's a good point, actually. I think that there probably would have been a way to save it, which I certainly wouldn't have thought of unless you said that, but by running up through the caves and to the transporter and into the save zone, save load may have saved it. I'm not sure what happens there, but
either that or re-entering the elevator and calling it back down to the copied city might have saved it. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I've never really seen that happen, so it may be, but I know certainly as soon as you're in the Infinite Voiding section, there's essentially no way to save that at all.
Yeah. In an effort to not say the famous marathon queue, but I've never seen that before.
Try contacting the bunker via laser relay system.
So just turning your attention to Icefire's screen here, he's making his way to the Resistance camp, and he's trying to, in this upcoming fight, just clear out the enemies as fast as possible again before making his way into the full-fledged boss rush half of this run. Unfortunately, I actually am not too certain if Qusteka would be able to finish his run within the allotted amount of time. Setting back that far into the game might just do him in. I'm actually not too certain on how much time he would have lost. But it is a hefty amount of time.
Yeah, it's the majority of the game, really.
I believe Icefire typing in chat there, if you pause, I believe on the correct frame, yes, but I'm not too certain if that is technically possible, because technically there is no floor underneath 2B as she falls, or begins her fall, rather. But yeah. I believe, and especially in a game like this, there is menu delay, there is input delay, and especially on a 60 FPS title, trying to do a frame-perfect trick is generally not worth it, and just resetting the game is more worth it.
But we see Icefire here entering another boss fight here with Bokushi, and that is incredibly fast. Wow, that was very good combat.
Getting
So-
Soshi to... Wow, getting Bokushi to threshold before the electricity goes away. That is very impressive and very lucky in terms of his crits.
Let's take this bastard down.
Overall, just incredible combat from Icefire as a result of these crit chips, these godlike crit chips that he has. I will
And that
add.
was some more excellent combat there that we saw on Core 1 there. The strategy to that fight, if anyone's interested, is to actually make him get onto the hill, because he sort of sinks down, he's very hard to hit, and he will throw out some horrible attacks. If you can get him on the hill, you can actually get a little bit higher and just throw your attacks into him, wail away on him. And
Yeah, I definitely know in terms of a casual playthrough, trying to damage that boss, especially on level ground, is definitely very difficult. His hitbox is rather wonky, especially when not pulling the boss up onto the hill.
And we're seeing Icefire just make his way towards Pascal's village for a little bit more combat here. He's going to protect poor Pascal, who can't protect his village.
Machines on the network have gone berserk.
Who conveniently was eaten by dinosaurs.
Trying to hold them off, but with these weapons, there's only so much we can do.
That's some
No,
more
actually-
great
These
combat.
guys out first.
And Core
Let's
2
see
here.
how Icefire performs on Core 2 with these crits. He might be able to get a zero cycle for free. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to slow-mo to slow down Core 2's movements, but overall, incredible damage! Look at that! Still being able to drop Core 1 as quickly and as efficiently as possible as a result of those crits is so good.
Most likely, yes.
Yep, and this comes back to what I said when we first saw those chips, that we're probably going to see some truly disgusting combat
Take
here.
care of Eve.
And I think that's what we are seeing. We're really seeing how broken the
I would argue that having the chipset that Icefire has right now is on par with a TAS level of gameplay that we could see here. Going into the Eve fight here, Icefire does have to be careful on some of his damage output because of a specific attack that Eve does when he puts his arms like that and he begins to yell. Eve begins a phase known as platforms, which can lose a good amount of time, but fortunately Icefire was able to skip that. And it looks like Icefire is not going for the phase 2 skip, despite the amount of damage that Icefire has. He could have had a much easier time in skipping that fight, but it looks like he's just going to melt him anyway. Look at this.
Wow.
Melting! Look at these crits! These are incredible! Holy crap.
So I wonder if what we're seeing from Ice here is I wonder how comfortable he is with slow-mo double damage glitch, because really to get that phase skip, as far as I'm aware, you essentially have to slow-mo to slow the dialogue down.
Definitely. Being able to slow down Eve's animation in self-healing like that is a almost crucial ingredient in performing that phase skip.
But
So
yeah,
now that Icefire is transitioned into phase 4, Eve is being a little bit of a mean boy and doing all these attacks here, but he's still being good on his damage. Icefire, being an older runner, may not try hitting Eve with his melee attacks. That is definitely something, especially with these crits. These crits could be dealing so much more damage, but he's not really taking advantage of them when in this phase. He's only really taking advantage of the lasers and the skill cells that he had picked up earlier. That can only deal so much damage to Eve.
NFCS destroyed.
but even bearing that in mind, that was still some pretty decent combat there from Ice. And now we're seeing Eve in his very final phase, where we can't actually melee attack, we can only do these ranged attacks, we can't pod program anymore.
Icefire opting to just stand still there. Very convenient for Eve to just also stand still as well.
CS destroyed. Range.
However, Icefire does need to make sure that Eve is still taunted in order to maximize the amount of damage.
When Eve detached from the network.
Overall, a very clean run by Icefire.
It's okay.
An incredible chipset at that. My god, I don't believe I've ever seen 3 crit plus 2s.
Guess so. But we can't.
Yeah,
One of
that
them-
was
Diamond, the other 2 being very low capacity.
So,
Incredible RNG in that respect.
so we really saw a bit of a god game there from Icefire in more than one respect. The RNG was incredible as well as his play. He was very unlucky to lose so much time to the deep factory skip, but that was still an incredible run from Icefire.
We'll see here if Icefire will hop into voice comms here just to have sort of a post-run discussion. But transitioning over to Qusteka's perspective here, I'm not too certain on the audio situation. We did have some difficulty earlier in the stream. It might not...
And I think we have Icefire here with us now. If you are here with us, Icefire, just congratulations on that race. That was really good to watch, really good to see.
That was an incredible run to watch. Unfortunately, lost a good amount of time in Deep Factory, but my god, I do have to say, those crits that Icefire got were probably hands down the best crits I have ever seen out of this game. And it looks like we have Qusteka in here as well. After self-destructing in the bunker.
Hold on, Qusteka, can you just advance the dialogue by 1 frame, please? Because I love the next line of dialogue.
Okay, sure.
Incredibly unfortunate overall. I mean, I don't think I've ever...
That was pretty much 100% my own. I attempted fate and fate won. I was too tilted by the fact that I didn't get the elevator dialogue skip, and I tried to get it desperately, and then I just messed up.
Yeah, I mean, you were having, from what I saw, a very, very good run up to that point. Were you actually ahead of your PB at that point?
To be perfectly honest, I have no idea. I had to reset it, performance issue. I was on decent pace, I think, but I don't think I would have had any chance to win against Icefire either way. Congrats, man, by the way. Must have been a pretty amazing run.
Indeed, it was. It was unfortunately... It's very unfortunate. I've never seen quite the performance out of the game in that respect, because in terms of what you went through, Qusteka, going into that elevator early might have actually been sort of a good doing from the game, because I'm not too certain in the experience that I've had with going into the elevator like that. It's always been sort of the rule of thumb that if you go into the elevator too much and you get transported back up out of the flooded or out of the copied city, then it was just an automatic soft lock. But in the way that you did it there, it was really sort of unique in how you had canceled the dialogue early enough that it actually caused you to have some extra time, in that you made it up to the cave system above the copied city, but it looked as if you had tried to re-enter the elevator, but unfortunately not being able to get back down to the copied city. I'm curious, actually, as to what would happen if you had reactivated the elevator and gone back down to the copied city.
I think I actually tried that, but I just couldn't make it work. Like, the elevator was not responding, the doors weren't closing, so...
Yeah, unfortunately,
desperate attempt. I tried to get to the transporter, but was teleported to the boss fight before I could make it there. I'm not even sure if I could have used the transporter for anything since we were still in the dialogue with Adam.
I'm here now.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I was really fearing in that, especially when leaving that cave system to go to the copied city, just sort of compounding that the copied city area would just not exist when you go back to it, which is just probably the most unfortunate thing we've had in this run, or in this tournament, rather.
As I said, it's pretty much my own fault. I should have just waited the dialogue out, not have been greedy and not have been salty or tilted. And yeah, despite that, I think I have way too much caffeine today. My hands are shaking like crazy, and I actually felt like I was playing really badly there for a really long time. But yeah, overall it was fine. And the spare dashing was pretty useless, to be honest, because my timing was completely off. I practiced it today on VC3 and VC4, and you need a completely different timing for that. So I'm pretty sure I was constantly being slower than normal dash heavy movement.
It certainly does take a good amount of practice overall as well.
I think Icefire's joined us now, so congratulations, Ice.
Thanks.
Yeah, congrats indeed.
Congrats, my dude.
Guess what happened to Qusteka?
I threw my run in copied city by accident.
Oops. Sorry to hear that.
No, it's fine. I congratulate you on the win. I heard it was a pretty amazing run, and I kind of expected to lose to you by a pretty big margin in the first place, so no worries.
I have a question for you, Icefire. When you had, in the Deep Factory section, when you had died to the exploding guys, what was sort of going through your mind there?
The first thing I thought was that the resistance chips killed me. So normally what happens is when you're stuck in that area between the two crushers with those exploding guys, you deliberately take damage from the first one, which puts you into invulnerability mode, and then the next one doesn't hurt you. But because I had resistant chips, that didn't happen, and then the second one killed me. So I was just thinking, those chips actually killed me there.
It's definitely like a two-handed handshake there between the two machines.
Back when that was actually part of the route, we didn't pick those up, so that's why that was my backup. It's like, well, I'll just face tank this damage, and then it didn't work. It was pretty nostalgic doing the lower factory. It's been a long time since I've done it.
But I do just want to reiterate, in terms of those crit chips, that was incredible. I have never seen the game just be that generous with crit plus twos.
I'm on the wrong save tab. Yeah, no, the 2 diamond plus twos was great, so I could fit 3 of them in there. And of course it happened on a iffy run.
But still stellar performance from both of you guys as well. Unfortunately, some of the spaghetti happening right at the very end for the two of you guys. But unless you guys have anything else, we could probably wrap up.
Nope, I'm good. Thanks for the race.
Same here. Thanks for the race.
Thank you guys for racing. In terms of the rest of this tournament, I believe there are a couple commands in chat for the rest of the tournament bracket for NieR Automata. !NA, !R, and !C for our runners and our commentators. I believe the link in particular for the tournament itself, tourney.nierspeedrun.com to see the entire bracket for this. If you are interested in learning A-ending for NieR Automata, definitely check out our Discord. We have a good amount of guides and resources for helping newer players learn. Lots of people who are willing to help out as well. I believe the link to that is discord.nierspeedrun.com. Check out our runners, check out our commentators. I want to thank Icefire and Qusteka for running today. I also want to thank Techtheus for being here with me.
Hi.
And I think with that, I think we're going to sign off. So thank you, Speed Gaming, again for hosting this.
Yeah,
Take care.
Thank you everyone who watched. It was a really entertaining race. I'm very glad I could sit here and commentate with you, Myth. Hope everyone here enjoyed it. And yeah, if you're interested, seriously look up this game. Doesn't matter what platform you're on. Learn the speedrun. Come and join us and have a nice time.
Likewise.
But yeah,
Take care, everyone.
Bye bye everyone.
Bye.